Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Orbital in Conversation with. My name is Olivia and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orbital magazine.
Hi, I'm Beth. I'm the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the Orbital magazine, and today we're joined by Ben. Ben, would you mind introducing yourself for us?
I was a master's student at Royal Holloway a few years ago. I studied the master's in cultural geography research, and I really missed the place. Actually, it's probably one of the best. I did it part time, related to my job, and I had to take a break through the middle for various health reasons. But yeah, it was the best. Probably the best 3 years of my life, and I miss Royal Holloway desperately. And any excuse to come back, I would.
Oh, amazing. Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us. So I'll start off by explaining kind of how we got in touch and why we've asked you to come onto the podcast. Thank you for taking the time. So as I've probably mentioned in previous episodes, everyone's probably sick of hearing about it. I'm trying to work my way into sports journalism, especially writing about football, women's football. And Ben is part of a site called Impetus Football, which covers women's football leagues, international tournaments, just everything really all around the world. So that's how we know each other. And yeah, that's how we've ended up kind of here today, really.
Yeah, perfect. So obviously, as we can tell from the kind of subtle football merch behind you there, this is where this interview is going. But obviously, Beth mentioned Impetus. Could you tell us a little bit about your work there and what it is?
Yes, about 4 years ago. So it was been just after the loss but one World Cup that was in France. I started it. Before then, I was doing a little bit of work for Norwich City Women around sort of promoting them and their stories, which went during the World Cup. And then after that, it kind of wasn't really going to go anywhere else because of the geographical distance and things like that between. So I just basically set up a site on women's football in my own bedroom. Although my career is as a teacher, I now work at a special school. I've always been into sort of writing and stuff like that, and it kind of seemed an outlet and somewhere to go with it. And the women's football. It's grown massively in that 4 and a bit years, but it's always been sort of quite a family orientated environment. The relationships between the clubs and the players and the people is still a very small family, so it's very easy to get to know people, and it's a very sort of warm environment. It started as a one person outlet for probably just over a year, and then about 18 months in, one article sort of changed everything, and it sort of overnight that one article sort of had about 3,500 views, and it just sort of went from there, and it sort of got to the stage where we had over 100 contributors, four continents of the world. We had people at the World Cup in sort of July, August, just gone. And it kind of went from there and sort of grew massively very quickly.
How do you, you mentioned there about working with people kind of all over the world. How do you find managing and working with such a large group of people and spread over such a large space?
Yeah, things have sort of changed since January. Since January, I kind of made a decision over Christmas that the reason I went into this was because I love writing. And as the site grew and grew, sort of all over the world, it kind of became very clear that I kind of wasn't doing much writing at all anymore. I was basically spending 3 hours a day sort of organising opportunities, some amazing opportunities for other members of the team and doing bits and pieces and the admin and applying for accreditation and this for lots of other people. And I kind of thought, actually, do you know what? I miss doing this for myself in a way. So I kind of didn't get to write as much anymore at all. So I made the conscious decision that I wanted to step down and take a step back so that I had time to write for myself, which I did. I don't kind of feel like I've let go. I'm not involved in the editing or publishing on the site whatsoever at all. But I've got lots of time to write now, and I'm working for a professional club, Perth Glory, based in Australia, who I follow closely since they started in 2008, and another team out in Western Australia, Balcatta. And I'm in some press conferences tomorrow for the Matildas, which I wouldn't have had the time to do if I was still editing the site and doing everything else in my free time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something we've heard quite a lot of, and even we've found editing the Orbital magazine here, as much as we love it, it does mean that we don't get as much of a chance to write, which is really difficult because obviously that's how you start off doing it in the first place. So yeah, it's really nice that you've been able to find a way to make more time for writing, and we'd love to hear a bit more actually about the work you're doing with Perth Glory and Balcatta at the moment, and the Matilda stuff, if you're okay to tell us a bit more about that, because that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've got family in Western Australia, so I've got three generations out there, and I've sort of been going out there since 2000. And sort of one of the, when would it have been, 2007, 2008, a certain local youngster who sort of grew up 20 minutes up the road from my family by the name of Sam Kerr, made her first appearance for Perth Glory in their first season when she was, I want to say 14, but I think it was 15. So yeah, I saw her play in her first season. It wasn't pro football then, but it was getting towards pro. So yeah, and because they're sort of like the local team for my local pro team now for my where my family are. Perth Glory were always my team. So now, as the sort of women's league developed in Australia and went pro, I've always followed them. I got to sort of very close to them and interviewed lots of their players in the past. But now I've got the time to write for myself. They've taken me on to write women's features specifically on the women's team for their club platform. So the latest one actually went on their club website today. So they play in the A League Women, which is Australia's equivalent of the WSL. It is a pro league. Obviously, it's not as it hasn't got the profiles of WSL, but since the World Cup, the crowds have gone up massively. I mean, I think Perth's, for example, Perth Glory's home gates this season are bigger than 3 or 4 WSL teams. Some of the top crowds they're getting to 5, 6, 7,000 within there, which if you take into account sort of like the difference in population between the UK and Australia, that's huge. So yeah, it's a dream come true to be able to write and support from a distance sort of the team that I care about and always have cared about, and it's been brilliant.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that you're doing that. It's, I mean, really cool, like really great work, but it's even nicer that it's a club that you followed for such a long time and that it's kind of personal to you. Like, it just makes it, yeah, it makes it even nicer, really. How does it work in terms of press conferences and games and everything then, and just the general work and writing in terms of time difference? Just curious to know kind of how that works.
Yeah, I mean, the one benefit is that WA Western Australia is the friendliest time difference between Australia and the UK. So it's at the current time is 8 hours, whereas East Coast is 11. So that is helpful in a way. I mean, as I say, I work in a special school, so during term time it's more awkward. Also, it's half term this week, so that's a lot better and not easier. So if there's a media conference, sort of midway through the afternoon their time, it's not so bad. But a lot of stuff can just be done through email as well. So that's fine. I mean, so for example, the Matilda's press conferences this week, ahead of their Olympic final round qualifiers. This week they've scheduled, because obviously a lot of their players play over here, so they've scheduled all of their UK-based players to do media conferences here this week, and they're embargoed to go out until next week in the build-up to the game first leg in Tashkent. So that's a bit of a result as well in terms of how that's panned out too. But normally the international windows fall during school holidays, which is perfect. So yeah, that's worked out quite nicely this time.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. That's definitely handy. That, yeah, we've got quite a few in our league here, haven't we? So that, yeah, comes in useful in this instance among others.
Yeah, I think something I think a lot of our viewers would find really interesting, especially if they are interested in journalism, is to kind of, if you could talk us through the basics almost of a press conference. Obviously it's not something we're necessarily, well, maybe you a bit more than me, familiar with. How do you kind of find them? What goes on? Like, kind of tell us the basics of a press conference.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's press conferences as a whole all different in terms of like the women's football ones. It takes a long time to be able to access them. So in terms of, I set the site up in 2019.
Mm.
It took 2 years to get access to the A League, or what was then the W League in Australia. It took us 2 years to get access to that. So through consistent, we've reported, I think we're the only outlet that's reported on every single match in that competition for the last 4 seasons. So we've got people that cover every game every weekend. And so I think they saw that and they kind of realized that, okay, we're serious and we know what we're on about in a way. And from that, the next stage was that we then got access to the Matildas, so Australia's national women's team, because on the back of them, what we did with the W League, or A League Women as it's called now. And then once we got the Matildas, we could then sort of show the FA over here that, look, this is what we are doing, this is what the standard of what we're doing. As a result of it, could we then potentially have access to the Lionesses, which they then eventually said yes. And then from then the WSL clubs all came in as well. So it's one of those things you've got to push for quite a long time, but prove what you're able to do. And once you're able to do that, then eventually you can get in. I think press conferences are very strange beasts in a way, because I think a lot of people sort of see them as kind of like a golden ticket to get into, but a lot of the time what you hear is actually incredibly dull and incredibly boring and not at all interesting whatsoever. I mean, you can sit in a media conference they're normally sort of about 15-20 minutes, and you might sort of pick up maybe one, maybe two or three at the most of things that are actually really interesting to go with, because you can always sort of like write a tick sheet of what you're going to hear for everything, for most of the ones that you always go into. And there's only sort of a handful, maybe 3, I would say probably 3 coaches around that I would actually really, really like to meet and have a pub, go down the pub and have a drink with, just because they're interested in what, they're always interested in what they say. The rest of them, it's kind of much of a muchness. So I think you kind of, it's great to get into them and listen, but I think it's also more about it's more about looking for the important things that come out and sort of trying to sort of spread the wood from the trees, because a lot of the stuff you hear is quite dull and unimportant and not vaguely interesting at all. But if you kind of look deep enough, there's kind of 1 or 2 things that will crop up that are useful to explore, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think especially what you say there about like pushing in. I think what we've noticed with journalism is it's all about pushing in, regardless of what kind of sector you're in. It's all about pushing in. But yeah, I think you do have to cherry pick all the good bits. So obviously you mentioned that you graduated from Royal Holloway. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Obviously you touched on it a little bit at the beginning, and then for us anyway, graduation is fast approaching. Do you have any advice for us? Any kind of career advice, post-graduation advice?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in a way it's a bit different, because I was at Royal Holloway as a postgrad, so I didn't do any undergrad there at all. I went back in as obviously as a mature student. When I went to do my undergrad, I wanted to do a combined honours geography and sort of media related undergrad degree. But it was very hard to sort of find any sort of uni where the 2 timetables would ever match. So I had to pick one or the other. So my undergrad was in media and society. But I always kind of made the promise to myself that I would go back to study geography, because it was always my passion, my subject that I loved, sort of through school and for A levels and that. So eventually, I'm trying to think, when it had been 2014, 15, I think, I kind of decided that I would like, to finally do it. The primary school I was working at the time, they kind of said, yeah, okay, we'll let you have half a week out, but we kind of want something back as a, for letting you do that as a part-time course. So I ended up sort of doing the PPA cover for geography for humanities throughout the school for the time that I was doing it, which was great. So yeah, I went back and I did the MA in cultural geography research in the Faculty of Geography, which is an amazing place to be. The lecturers and the professors there are, they were amazing. They're passionate about things that are absolutely really, really interesting. Just think it's the other little things about Royal Holloway, like sort of going in the library in the founders building, sort of like wonder who else sat in that very same chair, like 150 years ago or something, because it's just that the atmosphere that in that place is incredible. So yeah, I kind of specialized in two things. So I looked at Indigenous settler relations in Australia, so sort of like around the time of when the first British people went there, and kind of looked a little bit at that, and sort of the political situation around the time in the early 1970s, when the Prime Minister Gough Whitlam was removed by the Governor General at the time. So that was something I've always found really, really interesting. So I went into that. And I also looked at, sort of on the UK side, I sort of looked at Cornish culture and identity, and how Cornish people are very, very separate from English people, and how they believe that they are still a separate country, which in sort of some legal areas they could well be. So yeah, that's what I did, and I came out of that with my masters, and then went on to start a PhD at University of Exeter, which didn't quite finish. But yeah, that's the Royal Holloway side of the story anyway.
Oh, amazing. Thank you. Yeah, that's one of the reasons we enjoy doing this podcast so much, I think, is hearing how different everyone's journey is, kind of going from your undergraduate to then teaching, to doing your masters, to all the amazing football stuff you're doing now, especially all the things you mentioned covering the Australian League and international games. It's so interesting. It's such cool work. Like you mentioned, amazing players like Sam Kerr, who we're so lucky to have playing over here now, but also obviously had started her career over there, and is such a big part of the Matildas. So yeah, it's really, really interesting to hear more about that. Kind of circling back to what we were talking about before regarding kind of digital media, sports journalism, Impetus, what do you think it is that makes kind of outlets and platforms and websites like Impetus so valuable? Because I really feel like they bring something quite unique to that landscape almost of discussions surrounding the women's game. So I was just curious if you had any kind of thoughts on that and what you think makes it so special.
I think the thing is that it's still very much a niche area within mainstream coverage. So there's only a handful of national newspapers still that will have specific women's football writers. I think also there's been an awful lot of redundancies within the women's football media as well, the wider women's football media over the past sort of 8 to 12 months too. So there's even fewer people arguably now being paid to write about women's football since the Euros happened, which in a way is almost insane, but that's the way the financial situation is at the moment. So I mean, so basically the majority of the coverage of women's football is by volunteer driven writers or photographers or social media people, and I think that's the situation the game's in. It's almost, in a way, it's kind of almost, I don't want to say it's almost similar to non-league men's football, because that kind of sounds like a derogatory comment, but I just mean in terms of the national media, the paid national media, I should say, attention that it's given. I think it's reached a level of interest and recognition at the highest level anyway. Further down there's all sorts of issues which are very unfair still about how the game is financed and the expectations. But I think the issue is, although the interest in the game is there, it's not being able to be recognized by the mainstream written media anyway. It's probably the fairest way of saying it, because they don't have the money to be able to pay people to write about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That was really interesting to hear. I feel like we already kind of answered the next question. So should we skip
Yeah.
to the book recommendation? Do you want to
Yes.
go in
So,
with that?
as everyone will know, something we ask at the end of every interview is, could you give us a book recommendation, please?
This is the one question I've found the hardest out of all of them. I think because kind of like, although I've got certain authors that I really like and certain books that I really like, it kind of changes so often. I sort of love sort of crime stuff and sort of Swedish noir, and there's some really good Australian crime writers and stuff. So it's and the sort of the Millennium series by Stieg Larsson. I love those, but so choosing one is really, really hard because it changes. But I kind of thought I've gone for one that kind of reminds me of things that are important to me, I guess, in a way. So it's a big book. It's called City of Light, which is by Jenny Gregory, and it's a book about Perth in Western Australia. And strangely as it may seem, there were very, very few books about Perth. You can get all sorts of things about Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane and the Barrier Reef, but for some reason, I think because Western Australia is so far from everywhere else, it's 6 hours on a plane from Sydney, for example, is that far away. Nobody sort of really cares, and it's quite nice in a way because it means when you go there every year, it's very quiet and it's easy to relax. So yeah, City of Light is a book of pictures about Perth, sort of full of pictures of places that I love being in every August when I get to go back. So yeah, it's not a book that I would read cover to cover. In that respect, it's not something you'd read on the bus to work every day, but it's just something that reminds me of somewhere that's in here, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. No, that sounds really nice. Yeah, it's nice to have something a
Yeah,
bit
I was gonna
different,
say a
I
bit
think.
different.
Yeah.
Good.
Really nice. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been so lovely to hear everything that you've had to say. I'm sure it'll be really helpful and really nice for a lot of people to listen to as well. And yeah, thank you so much. I can't wait to keep up with everything you're up to at the moment, all the writing that you're doing. Yeah, really enjoying reading it all and seeing what you're up to.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It was lovely to meet you. And for everyone watching, we will see you in the next episode. Bye bye.